This is a quiet story, told slowly. There's nothing you need to do, and nothing you need to remember. You can listen closely, or let the words fade into the background as you rest. The story will move gently, without sudden moments, and it will stay with you whether you're awake or drifting off. Tonight's story is The Garden After the Guests Left. The garden looked larger once everyone had gone. Chairs stood where they had been left, angled slightly away from one another, their shadows stretching thin across the lawn. The long table near the centre held the quiet remains of use. Glasses stood empty, plates stacked neatly, a serving spoon resting where someone had set it down without thinking. A single napkin stirred when a breeze moved through, lifting and settling again against the cloth. The side gate clicked softly as it closed. Hannah Price remained there for a moment, her hand still resting on the latch, listening as the sound faded into the evening. The street beyond had returned to its ordinary rhythm, distant enough to feel separate. Inside the garden, the air shifted almost immediately. Not empty, simply unoccupied. She walked back across the grass at an unhurried pace. The gathering had unfolded exactly as she had hoped it would. No fixed structure. No obligation to entertain beyond offering space and food and time. Conversations had moved easily, forming and dissolving without effort. People had lingered where they felt comfortable, leaving when they were ready. The garden had absorbed it all without complaint. Now it held the echo of that ease. Hannah adjusted a chair and smoothed the tablecloth, pressing out a crease without fully resetting it. Clearing everything away could wait. The garden did not ask for efficiency. It asked for presence. Along the edges, the plants leaned inward slightly, leaves darkened by cooling air. She recognized them without looking closely. Rosemary near the wall, lavender lining the path, a low hedge that had taken years to grow into itself. She had planted most of them over time, guided more by instinct than design. She paused near the small tree at the far end and rested her hand against the trunk. The bark held warmth where the sun had reached it earlier, releasing that heat slowly now. Hannah stood there and breathed, letting the quiet settle more fully around her. The garden did not rush to reclaim itself. It accepted the transition from shared space to solitary one without resistance. She moved back toward the table and gathered the glasses, stacking them carefully on a tray. The clink of glass against glass sounded louder than it had during the gathering. The noise no longer softened by voices. She carried the tray inside, set it by the sink, then returned to the garden without turning on additional light. Dusk lingered. The sky held a muted glow, neither day nor night, allowing the garden to exist in a softened state. Shadows lengthened without sharpening. Colors deepened rather than darkened. Hannah took advantage of the moment, sitting in one of the chairs and letting her weight settle into it. She did not feel tired in the way she sometimes did after company. The tiredness she felt now was gentler, a release rather than a drain, the kind that came from having given something freely without overextending. She rested her hands in her lap and listened to the small sounds around her, leaves shifting, a bird settling somewhere nearby, the distant hum of a car passing along the road. She thought briefly of the people who had been here. Their presence lingered not as noise, but as impression. The way someone had laughed unexpectedly, the pause in conversation when food was passed, the comfortable silences that had formed between exchanges. None of it demanded replay. It simply existed as part of the afternoon that had already begun to fold itself away. Hannah had hosted gatherings like this for years. There had been a time when she filled the space with intention, worrying over whether people felt welcomed enough, fed enough, entertained enough. That impulse had softened with experience. She had learned that gardens worked best when they were allowed to do what they did naturally. People, she found, were not so different. She stood and collected a few plates, then stopped. The rest could wait. She sat again and looked across the garden, noticing how the arrangement had shifted without her direction. Chairs turned toward one another. A path worn slightly deeper through the grass where people had moved back and forth. Evidence of use that would fade by morning. The garden would recover easily. It always did. Hannah felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. Not pride, not accomplishment, just the steady sense of having held space long enough for something gentle to pass through it. She remained there as the light continued to thin, allowing the evening to close around her without instruction. The gate stayed shut. The garden stayed open. She stayed a while longer. The light thinned slowly, taking its time. Hannah remained seated long enough for the garden to change character without announcing itself. The colours that had held through dusk softened further, settling into muted greens and greys. The air cooled by degrees too small to notice all at once, only becoming apparent when she shifted in her chair and felt the temperature against her skin. She stood and began to clear the table properly. Plates were stacked with care, cutlery gathered and aligned without thinking. Each movement felt deliberate, but unhurried, guided by familiarity rather than obligation. The work did not feel like tidying up after something finished. It felt like completing a circle, allowing the gathering to rest where it belonged. She carried the stack inside and returned again, repeating the process until the table was bare. The cloth remained in place, smoothed but not removed. It held the faint outlines of where dishes had stood, pale shapes that would fade by morning. Hannah liked leaving it that way. Evidence of use did not need to be erased immediately. She paused near the centre of the garden and looked around. The space had already begun to reorganize itself. The breeze moved differently now that bodies no longer interrupted it. Leaves brushed together more freely. The air carried fewer overlapping scents, settling back into the familiar mix of earth and plant and cooling stone. Hannah walked the perimeter slowly, checking nothing in particular. Her feet followed the edge of the lawn, tracing a path she had walked many times before. The hedge at the boundary stood neatly trimmed, its shape maintained without severity. Beyond it, the faint outlines of neighbouring gardens blended together, each holding its own version of quiet. She stopped beside the herb bed and brushed her fingers lightly over the rosemary. The scent released immediately, sharp and clean. It grounded her, the way it always had. She had planted it years ago, when the garden was still finding its shape, when she herself had been doing the same. There had been seasons when this space felt like effort. She remembered afternoons spent worrying over weather forecasts, guest lists, seating arrangements. Times when hosting felt like performance rather than offering. Those seasons had passed gradually, without a single moment of decision marking the change. She had learned, through repetition what mattered and what could be let go. Tonight had confirmed that learning. The gathering had not needed her constant attention. Conversations had formed and reformed without guidance. The garden had held people easily, offering them places to sit, to stand, to move. Hannah had moved among them when needed, stepped back when not. The balance had felt natural. She returned to the chair she'd been sitting in and lowered herself into it again. The garden lights along the path came on automatically, their glow soft and low. They did not illuminate everything. They marked edges and turns, allowing the rest to remain in shadow. Hannah appreciated that restraint. Full visibility was not required to feel at ease. She leaned back and let her gaze drift upward. Above her, the sky had deepened fully into night. A few stars held steady where clouds allowed them through. The air felt settled now, the day fully released. Hannah breathed in slowly and felt the lingering warmth of the chair beneath her, the wood having absorbed the day's heat and begun to give it back. Her thoughts moved gently. She did not replay specific conversations or moments from the gathering. Instead, she held a general sense of it, a texture rather than a narrative. The sound of voices layered together, the way laughter had risen briefly, then fallen away, the ease with which people had stayed longer than planned, then left without apology. That ease mattered to her. It was something she had once struggled to create, believing it required constant effort. Experience had taught her otherwise. Ease emerged when space was offered honestly, without pressure to fill every moment. The garden understood that instinctively. Hannah stood again and walked toward the gate. She did not open it. She rested her hand on the wood and felt its coolness, the grain familiar beneath her palm. The gate marked the boundary between this quiet and the world beyond it. Tonight, she did not feel the need to cross that boundary. The garden had given her enough. She turned back and collected the last few items left behind. A folded blanket draped over a chair, an empty bowl set on the low wall near the tree. Each object returned inside without ceremony, placed where it belonged. When she came back out, the garden felt almost complete. The chairs remained, but they had been gathered closer together, angled inward slightly. The table stood clear, the cloth smooth. The path lights traced gentle lines through the grass. The plants held their shapes. Undisturbed, Hannah sat once more, this time on the low step near the house. From here, she could see the whole garden at once. The perspective felt different, more encompassing. She noticed how the space felt less like something she managed and more like something she shared. Even now, alone, the garden did not feel owned. It felt inhabited, shaped by use and care rather than control. She rested her elbows on her knees and watched the night settle further. The quiet did not press in. It held. Hannah realized, with a soft clarity, that the garden had given something back to her this evening. Not gratitude, not approval, but permission. Permission to let things end without sadness. Permission to allow spaces to empty without interpreting that emptiness as loss. She stayed there until the coolness in the air began to outweigh the warmth held in the wood. When she finally stood, it was without reluctance. The garden would remain as it was until morning. The chairs would wait. The plants would continue their slow work. The traces of the gathering would fade naturally, without instruction. Hannah stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. The garden rested. So did she. Morning arrived without urgency. Light filtered into the garden gradually, slipping between leaves and along the edges of the house, before settling fully onto the lawn. The air held a faint coolness, the kind that lingered after a clear night. Dew rested lightly on the grass and along the tablecloth, catching the light in small, quiet points. Hannah stepped outside, with a mug in her hands, and paused on the threshold. The garden looked as it had the night before, though softened by daylight. Chairs remained where she had left them, gathered loosely rather than scattered. The table stood clear, its cloth marked faintly by the memory of plates and glasses that had rested there. Nothing felt out of place, nothing asked to be corrected immediately. She walked down the path and stood near the center of the space, letting the morning settle around her. Birdsong moved through the air, light and intermittent. Somewhere nearby, a door closed, followed by the distant sound of a car starting. The neighborhood resumed its rhythm quietly, without intruding. Inside the garden, the calm held. Hannah took a sip of her drink and breathed out slowly. The tiredness she had felt the night before had passed, replaced by a steadier kind of energy. Not urgency, not motivation, just the simple readiness to move through the day without resistance. Hosting had once left her feeling depleted, as though she had given away something she struggled to recover. That feeling had faded over the years, replaced by a more balanced exchange. The garden played a part in that. She moved to the table and folded the cloth carefully, lifting it free and carrying it inside. The surface beneath was clean and cool, the wood pale in the morning light. She wiped it once, more out of habit than necessity, then left it bare. The table looked lighter without its covering, ready for whatever came next. One by one, she gathered the chairs and returned them to their places along the wall. The task felt unremarkable, its completion neither satisfying nor disappointing. It was simply the next small movement in a sequence that required no commentary. Hannah paused near the herb bed again, brushing her fingers lightly over the rosemary. The scent rose fresh and sharp, brighter than it had been the night before. Morning had a way of clarifying things. She inhaled and felt herself fully present, anchored in the simple fact of being here. She thought briefly of the people who had been in the garden. Their absence did not register as loss. It registered as completion. The gathering had served its purpose, allowing connection without lingering obligation. The ease of it had been real, not manufactured. That mattered to her more now than numbers or noise ever had. She walked the length of the garden slowly, observing how it held itself in daylight. The tree at the far end lifted its branches into the sun. The hedge cast a neat line of shadow along the boundary. The lawn showed faint impressions where chairs had stood and feet had passed, marks that would disappear as the day warmed. The garden did not cling to what had been. It released it naturally. Hannah returned to the step near the house and sat down, placing her mug beside her. From here, she could see the whole space again, but the perspective felt different from the night before. Less reflective, more grounded. The garden was no longer transitioning. It had arrived at its next state, without hesitation. She realized sitting there that she no longer felt the need to mark moments like these. There had been a time when she would have framed the gathering as success or failure, weighed it against expectations. carried it forward as something to measure herself by. That impulse had softened over time, replaced by a quieter understanding. Moments did not need evaluation to be complete. The garden did not assess itself. It simply continued. Hannah finished her drink and stood, stretching lightly before turning toward the house. There were other things to do today. Errands, messages to answer. The ordinary structure of the week waited, patient and undemanding. She felt ready to meet it without hurry. Before going inside, she looked back once more. The garden stood open and calm, its boundaries clear but unrestrictive. It did not belong solely to her, though she cared for it. It existed as a shared space, even when unoccupied. That was part of what made it generous. Hannah closed the door behind her and moved into the house, leaving the garden to the day. Outside, light continued to spread. Shadows shifted. Leaves turned slightly toward the sun. The space adjusted itself without instruction, carrying forward what it needed and letting the rest fade. By afternoon, there would be little sign that anyone had gathered there at all. That felt right. The garden had done its work quietly. Now it rested, ready to receive whatever came next, without holding on too tightly to what had already passed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for supporting the channel.